Your life is incredibly short. And I don't mean to scare you. Listen to me. Even if you live to 80 years, which is already above the global average, you don't actually get 80 usable years. Roughly 26 years out of those 80 years will be spent sleeping. And so that's one third of your life gone. Now, hard education. So, from early childhood through tertiary education, the average person spends between 50 to 20 years inside the schooling system, primarily designed to make them employable. So, it trains you to fit an economy, but rarely to decide what your life should be used for. So before you have even made a single serious adult decision about life, about meaning, about purpose, over 45 years of your life has been accounted for. Sleeping and education. So what remains is not an endless time. It's a shrinking margin. Maybe 30 active years if you're lucky. Oliver Burkeman's meditation for mortals begins with a blunt idea that most people refuse to accept. You don't have enough time to do everything that matters. And pretending you do is what keeps you anxious, busy, and perpetually dissatisfied. This book is not about squeezing more out of your days. It's about choosing what deserves your limited time, your limited attention, and accepting that your life is finite. In this episode of The Thinking Shelf, we will distill the ideas from Meditation for Mortals by Oliver Burkeman and ask ourselves, how well can we apply these things to living a fruitful and better life in our finite time? You're welcome to The Thinking Shelf, where I distill ideas from books, podcast episodes, articles I come across that I use in shaping my life and as well share with you. I'm your faithful host, Adegbaju David. And in this podcast episode, we are going to talk about something I've been actively thinking about. And considering the intro you just heard and then the book title, it might be a little bit weird for somebody to be thinking about death. And I say this because as a young man, the next thing you are expected to be thinking about is the fact of how to make the money, have the cars, grab the ladies. And if you're a young lady, the next thing expectedly is about how to build a family and all of those stuff. But I believe that one of the most fascinating ideas you can ever keep in the consciousness of your mind is the idea of death. And there's a popular Bible verse that people quote anytime it comes to like celebrating birthdays and all of those stuffs. And it's a quotation, I believe, from Moses, which is teach us to number our days so we can put our hearts to it. I believe that one of the major reasons why that place of the Bible is quite important is not because teach us to number our days so we can put our heart to it, then we start pursuing things. Is because teach us to number our days so we can put our heart to it, so we can have the consciousness of the fact that we are not mortals. We might be immortals when Jesus comes back and gives us that immortal body. But we still have this illusion in our mind that we are immortal beings. No matter how long you live, even if you live to 100, 150, you're going to die someday. And I think the thing that has been on my mind is I'm going to die someday. And so if I'm going to die someday, 45 years of my life is already decided. Sleeping, education, and what have you. How am I going to live the next 20, 35 years of my life? What would those 20, 35 years of my life amount to? And that is what led us to the very first book of this podcast episode, of this podcast, The Meditations for Mortals by Oliver Burkeman. So how did I come across this book? I came across this book through recommendations, and it has been such an amazing read. I'm just done with the first week. The main premise of the book is that the book is divided into 4 weeks. So we have 7 write-ups for each week, and the aim of the book is to cause you to divulge away from the productivity mindset of the internet age and the world generally, in the sense of also, and take that productivity mindset into what I like to call, or what I would like to call, coined from his book, to be directed productivity. So you're not just being productive in everything that comes into your space. You are being productive in things that matter, in helping you live the life that you want. As I've said, living the 20, 30 years of your life that is left. And so, the very first idea we'll be looking at is the idea of we have a limited time. Like I said, one of the things I've been thinking about is the idea of death. No matter how old you live, freedom begins the moment you accept that your life is finite and uncontrollable. So most of the time, we like to believe that our life is infinite and we can control it. I was speaking to a friend. Most of our life is simply a casual event. You wouldn't be in existence if your parents hadn't met. Your parents would have not been in existence if their parents hadn't met, and the cycle continues. So you see that everything of your life is a cascade of causal events. And so the causal events are uncontrollable, but our reaction to those causal events can be controllable. So the major part of our life is not trying to control our life, but to react in such a manner that gleans the best from the uncontrollable moment. And so that is the first thing. The first thing I drew out from the book is this. The three major problems that people face is extensive busyness, perfectionism, and then imposter syndrome. One of the unusual way Oliver took that idea is by connecting those three ideas into the reason why we have those three things is because we think our life is infinite. And I've been asking myself, okay, how does business tie to thinking our life is infinite? How does perfectionism ties into thinking our life is infinite? The reason why we would be perfectionistic in things we do is because we believe that there's going to be an opportunity, a situation where things will be aligned perfectly. But that's a lie, because most of our life is uncontrollable. Most of our life is simply a reaction basis. Even if you are actively taking action, we like to believe in this pragmatic way of life, or pragmatic ideology of life, which is I'm taking action. Me recording this podcast is actively me deciding to take action of my life. Like, I want to be a podcaster, so I'm recording this podcast, right? But where did the idea of being a podcaster come from? That wasn't an active decision. That was more or less a casual event. I came across somebody and then fell in love with podcasts during COVID, and then that graduated into things. And so my reaction is, instead of looking at that podcast and saying the podcast idea or the podcast dream and saying, I'm not good enough to be able to do it, by readjusting my lens and looking at it truly, that my life is going to be finite. And so if I don't do it now, I would end up being 65 with a brain not as I am now or as I have now, and then regret my life for not doing it. So if you remove the idea of your life being infinite, perfectionism will not be a problem. If you remove the idea of your life being infinite, imposter syndrome will not be a problem, because you are actively, I want to use the word worried, but it's not worried. You are actively conscious of the fact that you are going to die someday, and there is not going to be a perfect time. There is never going to be a situation whereby you are completely ready. I think I was listening to a podcast, and the question was asked, I think it was Elon Musk, and the question was asked, like, why are you so active in your dream of reaching Mars? And he said, because I want to reach there before I die. And the truth of the matter is this: it's going to die very soon. Oh, 30 years, 40 years, it is still very soon. And so that active desire of wanting to fulfill something before you die, or before Elon Musk dies, is the desire, or is the push. And so that means that because he is completely aware of the fact that he's going to die very soon, every other thing that is noise is trimmed out. I was listening to a podcast episode of I've forgotten the name of Daryl the CEO and this other person. This person is on I think Shark Den or something. This show where entrepreneurs comes to pitch their ideas. I've forgotten the name of the show. And so the guy was saying that one of the things he learned from working with Elon Musk, working with Steve Jobs, sorry, was the idea of noise versus signal. And he was saying that one of the major things about Steve Jobs, and he believes about Elon Musk, is that all they do is surrounded by signal and not noise. Let me give you an example of what I'm saying. Let's imagine that you are working somewhere and you are done from the day and you wanted to relax, right? Picking up your phone and then binging a Netflix film or a Netflix series for the next 7 hours is noise. Because you left that work that you hate and you are not actively finding solutions to leave that work that you hate. Rather, you are escaping the hatred you have for that work by drowning yourself in entertainment, in Netflix, in that series, in whatever. That is noise. What you want from your life is that you have the gradual elimination of noise and the gradual increment of signal. And that will not be possible if you do not see those 7 hours as you spending part of your limited time. If you see your life as an infinite basis, the reason why you will spend 7 hours binge watching a Netflix film or a Netflix series is because you feel, I still have 20 years, I still have 30 years, I still have 40 years. So if I binge watch a Netflix film at 26, that doesn't mean anything. But in our calculation at the beginning of this video, you realize that you do not have 20 years. You have practically less than 30 years. You have decades of your life fitted into you making good use of it. And so business is going to be done away with. You are streamlining everything in your life. And this brings me back to things that I've learned before, which I would love to share with you. I have in my notes here the Alex Omoze idea, which is the idea of you might not make tomorrow. And this is contrarian for a religious person. And it was contrarian for me. I remember the first time I heard it, I said, God forbid. God forbid, I will see tomorrow. You are not my God, right? But it's the truth. You might not make tomorrow. And if you might not make tomorrow, you don't know what tomorrow holds. Let me give an example. And this is not a death situation. This is just a normal life situation. I can say that I'm going to record this podcast tomorrow, right? But I have time to do it now. If I am thinking of my life as an infinite basis and not being present, and thinking of my life as something I can control, and it being uncontrollable, I could have postponed recording this podcast episode to tomorrow. Or something could pop up tomorrow. Something I do not have any control of whatsoever might pop up tomorrow, and then this time that I have, that I could have recorded the podcast, is lost. Why am I sharing this? Because Alex Omoze has this idea of there is no tomorrow, because tomorrow is unpredictable. If you know you have a work to do it today. And this is very profound, especially if you are walking away from the idea of your life being infinite. and you are coming to the reality that your life is extremely finite. This is profound. And if you fall into this consciousness, then business, oh, I'm busy. Most of our business is breakable work. So we say, oh, I want to study for the next 3 hours, but we study for 30 minutes and check TikTok for 15 minutes, or study for 30 minutes and check Instagram for 20 minutes. Whereas if we had said, I want to study for, you would discover that you wouldn't even need those 3 hours to study. Because if you are giving in your focus, because life is finite, what determines the number of hours you spend in active work is dependent on the intensity of focus you give. And I believe the only way you can give that intensity of focus is if you believe that your life is finite. Now, this moves us into the next idea. And this is I would say this is something I've had in my mind, but I've not been, I was watching this video of Chris where somebody was asking him that what is one idea you have heard over and over again, but you have failed to implement, and that was very profound. The same thing with me. There are some things I've heard over and over again, but I failed to implement. So one of the ideas is just do the thing. That's the second day of Oliver Buckman's meditation from what house. Do the thing. I love the way he crafted the title kayak versus super yacht. If you are thinking of mobility on water, of transportation on water, the same mobility or the same transportation that a kayak will give you, what we will call a canoe in Nigeria, is the same mobility or transportation that a super yacht will give you. Most of the time, when we are thinking of doing something, we are thinking of the super yacht. But the actual thing you want to do is transportation. You want to be able to move on the water. And regardless of whatever, even a raft is still going to move you a distance compared to you waiting for the super yacht. The essence of this idea is that the only way to spend your limited time and what matters is start doing it here and now. There is never going to be a perfect time, and there is never going to be a situation whereby you would be able to do it perfectly. This is the way I love to see it. I love to look at it like you are misplacing questions on the finished product rather than questioning the recipe. Imagine you see somebody create a cake and you are starting out. You do not know how to bake, and you're wondering, how did this person create the cake? Most times what we do is we go to the cake and ask the cake, how was this cake created? Whereas what we should ask is the recipe. The recipe are the ingredients that led to the cake. If you use the exact recipe, there's a very high chance you'll be able to create the same cake of the same taste, of the same texture, and of the same quality. What is the recipe that has created the cake for your ideal person? So for me, the recipe for every great person or every marvelous, tremendous person is do the thing. I want to read to you a quote from the book. This is from page 26. It goes, few things are more appealing when you are open to change your life than a new system for doing so. But the allure can lead you astray. Almost nobody wants to hear the real answer to the question on how to spend more of your finite time doing things that matter to you, which involves no system. The answer is you just do them. You pick something you genuinely care about, and then for at least a few minutes, a quarter of an hour, say, you do some of it. That's it. That's the essence of it. One of the traps I constantly fall into is thinking of, like I said, is meeting that person with the ready-made cake and asking, how can I get the ready-made cake? Whereas instead of asking, what is the recipe that got you this cake? Let me make it practicable. For example, I'm looking at Chris Williamson's videos, or I'm looking at the Diary of a CEO videos, I'm looking at schools that have been up there, and I'm worried or I'm conscious of how to create those high level situations that they've gotten themselves into. But those high level situations they have gotten themselves into would not be possible if they didn't do the thing. The thing had to be done. The thing was record the podcast, post it, record the next podcast, post it, get in the building, start with 2 students, start with 3 students, worry less about the number of people that are watching, worry less about the number of students that are coming in, worry about the product. The product is the video you are watching. The product for the school is the students, the result. Worry about those things and every other thing will come forward. It's like Jesus telling us that worry about the righteousness worry about following me and living right, and every other thing will come. So we see the people who has the every other thing, and we want the every other thing without doing the thing that led to the every other thing. I love another quote from the book. The main point, though it took me years to realize it, is to develop the willingness to do something here and now as a one-off, regardless of whether it's part of any system or habit or routine. If you don't prioritize the skill of just doing something, you risk falling into an exceedingly sneaky trap, which is that you end up embarking instead on the unnecessary and worse, counterproductive project of becoming the kind of person who does that sort of thing. This is what I glean from that passage. Before you start worrying about the additions, before I start worrying about the lightning, or start worrying about how to optimize my YouTube videos for reach, or before I start worrying about how the school building is, or the painting, or I'm picking examples from my life so you can be able to correlate and then pick examples from your life. I can't give examples from your life. The only life I'm experiencing is my life. Before I start worrying about, the perfect system for students to understand, or the perfect way to be able to explain these books to you, I have to become the sort of person that does it. I have to become the sort of person that reads. I have to become the sort of person that records themselves and being able to be a better communicator in explaining ideas. I have to become the sort of person that is able to teach right. I have to become the sort of person that is able to design educational materials for retention and application in the real world. The main goal is to become the sort of person that carries out the creation. The main goal is to become the sort of person that creates the cake. And then once you become that sort of person, every other thing is subsidiary. And so the only way you become that sort of person is by doing the things that is required. Whatever your dream might be, whatever your goal might be, I want to get fit. It's not about your running shoes. It's not about the right gym apparatus. It's not about the right feeding or the right clothing or whatever. The aim or the right mindset is, how do I become the sort of person that enjoys exercise? The right mindset for my case is, how do I become the sort of person that enjoys reading and explaining the ideas to you? How do I become the sort of person that can teach well and then help students to become the best aspects or the best versions of themselves? Every other thing is a product of becoming that person. And becoming that person is using your finite, limited time, devoid of business, perfectionism, and imposter syndrome, to take that time to evolve in the hard work of crafting that person. The major reasons I believe that you can fall prey to this, like Oliver Burkeman talks about, is the idea of wanting to control. You want to, because you believe that if you could be able to control these things, then what you wanted will happen. And by doing the thing, you are employing faith. By recording that podcast episode for me, I am employing faith because I do not know what this will turn out to be. Neither do I know if I would eventually become the sort of person that does the thing. The next idea we'll be looking at is the idea of there are no choices, there are no right choices, but only trade offs. I want to read an excerpt of the book first. Consequences are not optional. It is the nature of being finite that every choices you make comes with some sort of consequences. Because at any instant, you can only pick one part and must deal with the repercussions of not picking any of the others. He opened up this chapter by giving an example of a friend of his that he had, whereby the friend needed to decide, do I divorce my wife or do I stay with her? If I divorce my wife, then I cause my children to express the sadness or the despair of two parents leaving each other. But if I stay with my wife, I allow myself to experience the sadness and despair of staying in a relationship I don't actively want. So the friend stayed in this relationship hoping that the third option will open. And the third option he was hoping to have was a situation whereby both consequences was not a reality, whereby he could be able to leave his wife and the children are not affected. And if he decides to stay, he's also happy in the situationship of the relationship of that matter. And this is the way most of us live our lives. If you realize that you have a finite time, I believe that you will not mind the fact that there are consequences. The question should then be, what consequences am I willing to accommodate? Or what consequences are better than the other? Let me give you a practical example of this. For example, I think I've shared this before. My family wanted me to study medicine, and um, and then I said I wanted to study education. The decision I made to study education has its consequences. Number one, I wouldn't get a high paying job, right? I wouldn't be viewed as somebody of high prestige in the society like the medical profession. But choosing medicine has its consequences. I wouldn't have time for myself. I wouldn't have time for the things I love to do, to read, to record videos, to share my ideas. I wouldn't have that time. Possibly, I would not have time for the self introspection I love to have. Also, I would have to experience the death of people. So every decision, there was no right or wrong choices in such an instance. The right choice is that which suited my finite life. Meaning, what will I do? Which of the choices will I pick that at my deathbed I would not regret? Another example is this podcast episode. I could have decided not to record the podcast episode. If I decide not to record the podcast episode, I don't have to go through reading the book. I don't have to go through the mental tasks of collating ideas and finding the thing points and then being able to explain it to you in a way that you'll be able to understand. But if I then record the podcast episode, the consequence is after posting it, I have to think, is this acceptable? Did I explain it well? I have to go through the consequence of editing the video, of wondering what ways could I have made it better. Both decisions of recording and not recording carries its consequence. But the question I would love to ask, or I would love you to ask in anything you are doing that requires you to think about things. At my deathbed, which of the consequences will I happily live with? For example, I would happily live with the consequence of recording the podcast episode.
So there are nothing that we do that doesn't have a consequence. But the major question is, which consequence are you happy to live with? Leaving your parents has its consequence. Staying with them has its consequence. Which consequence are you willing to bear with? Leaving that job has its consequence. Staying with this job has its consequence. But which consequence would you gladly be grateful that you lived in it at 80 years? That's my question to you. Well, I've come to the end of this podcast episode, and I hope that you have been able to pick up some ideas. My interpretation of Meditations for Mortals by Oliver Burkeman. The major purpose of this podcast episode is to incite a reading culture in you, whereby you take this and wonder, what else will I pick from the book, separate from that which David has picked from the book already. And I want you to do that. Pick up the book. If you want to have the book Meditation for Mortals, just send me a message on my WhatsApp, and I will direct you to where you can get the book at an easy and affordable price. This has been the Thinking Shell, and I've been your faithful host, Adegbaju Dave.